Okay, and I'm going to start the webinar. Well, let me start the webinar. Okay. Try again. Unless there's, do you know he's waiting to be allowed in? Let's see.
The attendees.
I can't get it to start. It's not working. Okay.
Let me know if you see a fire ant approaching.
A what?
A fire ant. Get it? Grass? Fire ant?
Okay. It's not allowing me to start the webinar for some reason. Let me see if I could make you, Lou, the co-host. See if you're able to. I'll make you the host, Lou, okay? Can you start the webinar, Lou? There should be a button in the middle. I can't hear you, Lou. Okay, we're live now. Okay.
Welcome to our Tenant Rights Power Hour. Bienvenidos a nuestra hora de poder para los derechos de renteros. Mi nombre es Lou. My name is Lou, Project Coordinator for the Right to Counsel Project with Texas RioGrande Legal Aid in San Antonio, Texas. Before we start, I would like to provide instructions in Spanish for the folks on how to hear this presentation in Spanish.
Hey, Lou, I'm sorry. Can you please grab me the host access again? It won't let me share my screen.
Hold on, please.
Apologies about that. We're having a little technical difficulties. Yeah.
Yes, you sure are.
Okay. If you go to participants and more, you should be able to give me the host access. Okay. You're ready to go. Thank you, Lou.
You're surely welcome. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties, but here we go. One thing we would like to do is welcome you to our Tenant Rights Power Hour. Bienvenidos a nuestra hora de poder para los derechos de renteros. My name is Lou, Project Coordinator for the Right to Counsel with Texas RioGrande Legal Aid in San Antonio, Texas. Before we start, we would like to give instructions in Spanish for folks on how to hear this presentation in Spanish. Si usted habla español y prefiere escuchar esta transmisión en español, lo puede hacer por medio de Zoom. Usted tiene que estar conectado por su computadora bajo el portal de Zoom para seleccionar la opción de interpretación. ¿Qué debo hacer para cambiar la transmisión en español? En el centro, hacia abajo de la pantalla de Zoom, hay una barra de herramientas con varias opciones. Seleccione la que dice interpretación. Haz clic y seleccionar español. Nuestra traductora, Rosemary García, estará interpretando la transmisión en español. Muchas gracias, Rosemary. Now I want to tell you who we are. Trala provides free legal services to low-income Texas residents in 68 counties of Central, South, and Southwest areas. We cover different civil law practices, areas such as housing, family, consumer, employment, and others. Now that I got that out of the way, okay, well, here we go. Let me introduce to you to the women who will be leading today's Power Hour, who is Molly Wright and Mary Mayan, our housing paralegals at Trala. And we also have our housing attorney, Madeline Huneke, who will be providing important information and answering your questions tonight. So hi, Molly and Mary and Maddie, how are you guys doing?
Thanks so much, Lou. Doing great. Really excited to be here. Really excited to be part of this.
Rocking out, rocking out. So thank you so much for the introductions, Ms. Lou. Today, we're going to be answering questions on basic tenants' rights, repairs, evictions, process, and resources. So as you can see, let's just get started. Everyone is muted right now to get through this presentation, but there will be an opportunity to ask the attorney through all of our platforms. How do you get your question to our attorneys? All you have to do is simply drop a Zoom chat in your little Zoom chat you see down there on the bottom, or you can send an email to the right to counsel at trla.org, your questions as you see on the screen, or you can even text us to 210-212-3703. So you can get your question to us, either of those three, and we'll be on the lookout for your questions. But please, a quick disclaimer that the following is legal information and not legal advice. So always look to your lease and to ensure different rules don't apply. Due to confidentiality protections, we ask that you not share personal information with us or ask any questions relating to your personal legal issue. If you would like to apply for help with us, then simply contact us separately via email or the telephone number 210-212-3703. So as we know, many tenants have faced not only rent hardships, but also had to experience an eviction and or homelessness due to the COVID pandemic crisis. Most recently, though, the Texas winter storm about a couple months ago or late February has left many tenants with repair issues, and some remain without power and water even to this day. We hope that this legal information that we provide you today is useful to you and that you share it with others as well. So to start off, Maddie, can you summarize the tenants' basic rights that we have?
Thanks, Molly. Of course. I think the first one is the most important. And if there's one thing that I hope you take away from this presentation today, it's this. You have the right to a hearing before you're evicted. What that means is just because you got an eviction notice doesn't mean you need to move out. You have the right to a hearing first. So if you get that eviction notice, call us. Call us at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, and we can talk to you about the process. But you cannot be evicted without a hearing, without seeing a judge first. That's the first right, your right to a hearing. You also have the right to proper notice. So one of the steps in the eviction process that we'll talk about later in this presentation is your right to get an eviction notice. You can't be evicted without getting an eviction notice, and we'll talk about that more later. You have the right to request repairs, and we'll talk about that more later in this presentation as well. You have the right to report. That means calling the police if there's violence. That means calling 311 code enforcement if there's a problem in your unit. You have the right to report. You also have the right to record. And I want to be clear that we're not talking about, sort of undercover detective work here. What we're talking about is if you're part of a conversation, you have the right to record that conversation. You also have the right to request a reasonable accommodation. What's a reasonable accommodation? That's a small change to the rules or the policies or your home, a small change to accommodate your disability. So you have the right to ask for a small adjustment in the rules, in the physical home, for example, grab bars in the shower, and to your landlord's policies, for example, paying rent in the middle of the month rather than on the first of the month, based on when you get your check. That's your right to request reasonable accommodation. You also have the right to be free from retaliation. What that means is your landlord can't evict you or raise your rent or change something else about your tenancy because you've done one of these other things we've talked about. Your landlord can't evict you because you requested repairs. Your landlord can't raise your rent because you requested a reasonable accommodation. So one of your tenant's rights here in Texas is the right to be free from retaliation. And just before we move on, Molly, I want to make sure everyone knows that as a tenant in Texas, you still have you've got to pay rent. So just because you've requested repairs, and again, we'll talk about this more later, but just because you requested repairs, that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay rent. Just because you're in the eviction process, that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay rent. All of the rights that a tenant has, those rights are subject to the obligation, the responsibility to pay rent.
Thank you, Maddie. As you know, Maddie, the Texas winter storm, winter disaster a couple months ago or late February has caused delays in repairs or unmet repairs from landlord's end, such as burst pipes. Can you go over how a tenant should address repairs after a disaster?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think, I always want to say there's like two different ways to address a problem, right? So the first way is address it as a human. Talk to your landlord, help them understand what's going on in your apartment, maybe submit a maintenance request in the online system, make a phone call, act like a human and try to work with them in good faith to get the repair done. I think the more important thing to talk about though is what do you have to do to put yourself in the position where you can force your landlord to make repairs? What steps do you need to take so you can force your landlord to make repairs? There's a couple of them. There's a couple requirements. The first one is, unfortunately, you've got to be up to date on your rent. You've got to be up to date on your rent, and the repair that you're asking for has to relate to health and safety. Okay. The repair that you're asking for, you can't have caused that problem. You're not going to be able to force your landlord to fix something that you broke, that your kid broke, that your guest broke. So the repair's got to be not your fault. And then here's the big one. The most important thing for requesting repairs. In order to force your landlord to make repairs, you need to ask in writing. And I want to be clear that I'm talking about on a piece of paper. So email is not good enough. Text message is not good enough. A request in the online portal, that's not good enough. You got to ask in writing on a piece of paper. And our recommendation is that you send that letter, you send that written request through certified mail. Certified mail, the post office can help you do it. You get a tracking number. The person who receives the letter has got to sign for it. The reason I suggest certified mail is because if you send it any other way, for example, if you hand your landlord that piece of paper, then you've got to do it twice. If you send just a regular letter, you've got to do it twice. And when I say do it twice, what I mean is you've got to send 2 letters, or you've got to hand them 2 letters. If you send your letter certified, your paper written request for repairs certified, you've only got to send 1.
Okay.
And then 7 days after you've sent that certified letter to your landlord, you have a lot of options. If your landlord hasn't fixed things, you can terminate your lease. You can sue your landlord for money. You can sue your landlord to force them to fix whatever's going on in your home. And we encourage folks to call Texas RioGrande Legal Aid if you're in this position. But just to reiterate, on the repair request, if you want to force your landlord to make a repair, you need to send them a written paper request for repairs, and we suggest you send it certified mail. So that's one way, Mary, that tenants can address problems that came from Winter Storm Uri, that written repair request. Another thing to do, say you aren't up to date on your rent and that you're not going to be able to force your landlord to make repairs in that way, call 311, call code enforcement, ask them to come out, and they can, do their thing. Another thing to do is to check your lease. Some tenants have extra protections in their lease that give them other advantages in this situation.
That's really good information. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And Maddie, are there additional resources like for tenants that can be referred to that we can refer them to if they've been affected by, like, say, the winter storms that Mary was talking about earlier, like FEMA or something?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Everything that I was just talking about, written request, 311, and check your lease, that applies to a repair that you need no matter why it happened. For repairs needed because of Winter Storm Uri, there's extra help out there from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. On your screen, you can see what you need to do to apply to FEMA. And you can go to www.disasterassistance.gov to get more information there. I think the two most important things I'd say about FEMA is this is going to be personal property, and it's going to be personal property that your renter, if you have renter's insurance, damage to your personal property that your renter's insurance did not cover. And the other thing I'd say is we've got a May 20th deadline. So the initial deadline was, I want to say April 21st, give or take. They've pushed the deadline back, but your deadline to apply for FEMA assistance is May 20th.
Okay. Okay.
So Maddie, what happens when damages by a disaster are many and property is not safe or usable?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that we've heard from a handful of folks, right? The winter storm made their home totally unusable. What can you do in that situation? The first thing to do is to read your lease. And at Legal Aid, we're happy to read your lease with you and to analyze what rights you might have in this moment. I think there's two important things to say about when your home is unusable. The first thing is that you have the right to terminate your lease. There's a lot, and there's a lot of details to think about. I encourage you to call Legal Aid. You're still on the hook for rent up until the time you terminate. Your landlord still might charge you for damage that wasn't related to the winter storm, that wasn't related to why the unit became unusable. You want to send your termination in writing. If you have a security deposit, you want to make sure you ask for your security deposit back. But for a tenant, if your home has become unusable, you can terminate your lease. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is that your landlord can terminate the lease. And what I'll say about that is, if your landlord is terminating your lease because your home is unusable, your landlord has still got to walk through the eviction process. I know I keep mentioning it, we're going to get to it in a minute, but getting you out of your home because your home is unusable is a multi-step process, and your landlord's got to do it all right. And you'll have the opportunity to stand up for yourself at several points along that process.
What if damages are only a few and the property is partially usable?
Yeah, if the property is still usable, so it's not totally uninhabitable, if the property is still partially usable, the first thing we want to say is definitely keep paying your rent. On the tenants' rights slides at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about a tenant's responsibility to pay rent and how that really is enduring. That's really a permanent requirement. You want to check your lease, of course. Some leases provide extra protections, some leases have extra responsibilities. And you can certainly ask your landlord for a rent reduction, right? You can negotiate about this. For example, if you can't use the laundry room, or you can't use the parking lot, or you can't use your swimming pool because of storm damage, you might negotiate with your landlord about lowering your rent. The most important thing we'd say there is get it in writing. Get it in writing, get it in writing. And a small group of folks, I apologize, this is the last thing on the partially usable homes, is that some folks can sue their landlords to lower their rent.
Oh,
And we encourage you to call us about that.
oh, okay, okay. Wow. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. And so like, I know a common question that's always asked a lot by people that call us is, can a landlord really, I mean, can a renter actually or tenant actually get evicted during COVID-19 pandemic, especially when they passed that thing with the CDC that's supposed to protect us? I mean, can the landlord actually, do people really get evicted during COVID-19 pandemic when they said that we're protected?
Yeah, what an important question. I'm so glad you asked. The
Yeah.
answer is definitely yes. Evictions are still happening. In a minute, we'll talk about the CDC order that you just mentioned, Molly. That order protects certain tenants if they take action, and it protects them until June 30th. Again, we'll talk more about that specific protection in a minute. But I think to your main question, my answer is definitely yes. Evictions are still happening.
Wow. Wow. And how does the person know that they're being evicted? Like, just with the notice to vacate or something, or how do they know that they're being evicted?
Yeah. So the eviction process is a multi-step process, and
Okay.
and you might, depending on what's happening, you'll know you're at that stage of the process. So I think the best way to answer your question, Molly, is just to walk through the process.
Okay.
And I think that helps people understand where they are in the process, right? So as we mentioned on that first slide with basic tenant rights, you've got to get an eviction notice before you're evicted. So getting a notice to vacate or an eviction notice, same thing. That's the first step in the process. It might be taped to your door. It might be handed to you. It might come in the mail. It might come in certified mail. But the notice to vacate or the eviction notice says, I'm demanding that you move out. I'm demanding that you vacate the property. That's step one. And I just, at the risk of being repetitive, I want to repeat, you don't have to move out when you get that first eviction notice. That's step one, and what you can see is a long process. So when you get that notice, you know the process has started, but the game isn't over yet, and you can stay in your home. The second thing that happens after the eviction notice is that the landlord will file the lawsuit. So the landlord will go to the courthouse and start the legal process. You'll know that's happened because the constable will serve you, probably. The constable, as you can see in that photo on your screen, will come to the door and hand you paperwork. There's other ways that you can be served under unusual circumstances. Sometimes it'll be taped to your door. But step 3 in the eviction process is you receive court paperwork. That paperwork will tell you when is your court hearing. Right now in Bexar County, a lot of the court hearings are on Zoom or on video conference the way we're talking now. And for those that aren't, you have the option to request Zoom. That may change in the near future. But you'll get that information when you receive the lawsuit, when the tenant receives the lawsuit. That's step 3. Step 4 is the court hearing. You have the chance to tell the court your side of the story. And it's really important that you show up, because if you don't show up, you lose because you didn't show up. So far we've got eviction notice, the landlord starts the lawsuit, you receive the court paperwork, the tenant receives the court paperwork, then you have the court hearing. Well, what happens if you lose in court? Is that it? Definitely not. You have the chance to appeal. And appealing means asking another court to take a second look at the case. The deadline is tight. So after your hearing, if you lose, you only have 5 days to appeal. And we encourage you to call us at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid. We can give you the paperwork you need. We can talk to you about how to do it. After the hearing is the appeal, your appeal opportunity. And if you aren't able to appeal on time, the next thing that happens is that the writ of possession issues. That's step 6 on your screen. You can see the photo in the bottom right. A notice is taped to a door. That's a writ of possession. And what that notice says is, at this date and this time, the constable is going to come and escort you out. So the writ of possession, I'm just going to repeat, is taped to the door, and it says this is when you're going to be escorted out. They've got to give you at least 24 hours heads up, and then you're at step 7, where the constable comes to the home and can escort the tenant out.
Earlier, you mentioned the CDC order. What does the CDC order do?
Yeah, great question. The CDC order, which we mentioned earlier, is a temporary pause for some tenants, only eligible tenants, and it pauses some evictions. So it only pauses evictions for non-payment of rent, and it pauses those cases until June 30th. I want to point out that the order doesn't cancel rent. So just because your eviction process is frozen, that doesn't mean that your debt to your landlord isn't increasing. Every month that goes by, late fees, if utilities are part of your lease, all of that is adding up while your eviction case is frozen because of the CDC order.
How can I know if I'm an eligible tenant to be protected under this order?
Yeah, so we've got the criteria on the screen. There's four criteria. I'll walk through them in a second. But I think the real answer, the best answer to your question is you should download this form. And on our next slide, we're going to show you how to do that. Download the form and read it carefully. If every sentence on there is true for you, then you're eligible. And all you've got to do to get protected is sign the document and give it to your landlord. So like I say, we've got the criteria on the screen kind of in an easier, a more readable way. And the 4 criteria are: 1 is being financially eligible. So as an individual, if you make less than $99,000 a year, a shortcut on that is if you got a stimulus check, then you're in. The second requirement is if you can't afford to pay your rent right now. And this requirement takes into account the fact that we've all got to buy groceries, put gas in the car, etc. Taking into account your necessary expenses, can you pay rent? Are you doing your best to try to pay rent, to pay partial rent? The third requirement is that you have done your best to apply for rental assistance. And later in this presentation, we have suggestions for where you can apply for rental assistance. The fourth requirement is if you're evicted, you would become homeless. You would have to double up, or you would be just out of a home. So those are the 4 requirements kind of paraphrased. And I'll just repeat that the best thing to do is download the form, read it, and ask yourself, are these sentences true for me? So I think what we're seeing on the screen now is, where can you get this document, right? This is a powerful document that will pause your eviction, your non-payment eviction, if you're eligible. If you search TRLA, that's Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, then your first hit will be our website. On our website, the first slider item is about the CDC order, so you want to click there. And here's the information. So you've got coverage until June 30th. You've got more information, more detail about what I said just briefly here. You've got the eligibility requirements. And then down here, tenant must take action to be protected. So here's where you can download the form. And what you've got to do again is print it, sign it, get a copy to your landlord. That can be in mail. We've seen folks take a photo of the letter and then text that photo to the landlord. We've seen folks electronically sign and then send that electronic document to their landlord. All different kinds of ways to do it. But the key questions are those sentences true for you? Did you sign the document? Did you give it to your landlord? And the last thing I want to say just quickly on the CDC order is you've got to sign it under penalties of perjury. And what that means is if you sign it and it's not true, there could be criminal penalties. And for non-citizens, we think those criminal penalties might have serious immigration consequences.
Wow. Wow. That's a scary document.
Yeah, it's a powerful document, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was wondering with that document with the CDC, does a person still need to pay rent?
Yes, definitely. So again, the CDC order, all it's doing is freezing your case. It's freezing it wherever it is when you give the landlord the declaration. But your rent is still accruing, late fees.
Oh gosh.
And the other thing to say about that is one of the things that you've signed on that paper is I am doing my best to pay as much of my rent as I can.
Oh, okay.
So unfortunately, we've seen cases where a tenant signs the declaration, gives it to their landlord. And then the landlord says, well, wait, judge, I don't think this is true. I think the tenant is lying.
Okay.
And then the tenant is in the position of having to prove, the tenant has to prove to the judge, like, yeah, I am doing my best to pay my rent. So that's an extra reason why the order doesn't forgive rent and why it's important to pay your rent as much as possible, even if you're protected by the CDC order.
Wow. Wow. Well, speaking about paying rent, I hear that there's several rental assistance programs that tenants can look into that can help them pay those rents, right? What are a couple of them that you know about?
Yeah, I think the two main ones are on your screen now.
Okay.
City of San Antonio Neighborhood and Housing Services Department.
Okay.
And you've got the website on your screen. They're able to give rental assistance to a lot of tenants. The other one that I want to mention is the Texas Rent Relief Program.
Yeah.
And that program is statewide. So for the city of San Antonio, folks anywhere in Bexar County, not just in the city, but anywhere in Bexar County can apply with NHSD for that rental assistance.
Okay.
Texas Rent Relief is anywhere in Texas. And that program has a couple of advantages. One of them is that your landlord doesn't have to agree. Your landlord doesn't have to support your application for rental assistance. Texas Rent Relief can also give up to 15 months of rent, which is a big chunk of rent, some back rent, and some future rent. Texas Rent Relief is able to give future rent. And by applying at texasrentrelief.com, you also that's sort of your entry point also for two other rental assistance programs, Texas Eviction Diversion Program and Texas Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
Wow, that's amazing, Maddie. So for participants in collaboration with all the legal aid providers in Texas, there is a website that we can visit. It's called stoptexaseviction.org for legal resources and information on the eviction process and rental assistance programs, right? So it should be, and in case you can't see it, it's stop and then TX and then eviction, EVICTION.org. So it's a really good website for legal resources and information.
Are there any other protections that landlords must follow?
Yeah, there's two more that I want to mention. One is on your screen. This is a CARES Act protection. So earlier in this presentation, I mentioned that you can't be evicted unless you get an eviction notice first. Usually eviction notices have to be about 3 days. There are different circumstances for different tenants, but usually your eviction notice has to be 3 days. But because of COVID, for a lot of properties, for a lot of tenants, it's not 3 days, but 30 days. To figure out if you're protected, you can use this map that you see on your screen. And that website is txcaresact.org. You search your address, and if and then the map will tell you, are you covered by the CARES Act? That's this new law. If you're covered by the CARES Act, then for a non-payment eviction, your landlord needs to give you a 30-day eviction notice, not just a 3-day notice. So that's a big new protection, Mary. And the other one that I would mention is in the city of San Antonio only, when landlords are giving these eviction notices, giving the notice to vacate, they've got to also give a notice of tenants' rights. So if you get an eviction notice, if you live in the city of San Antonio and you don't get that notice of tenants' rights, we encourage you to call 311, and your landlord can be fined up to $500 for not giving you that notice of tenants' rights.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. So we're going to go ahead and now open the floor to answer some questions that either people can send to the email at righttocounsel@trla.org. That's right to counsel, 3 words into one. Or you can text your questions at 210-212-3703. We're going to take the next 10, 15 minutes to answer some questions. And we do have one individual that sent in a text message. Now, her question is, she's saying that the apartments threatened eviction. The constable was supposed to come and give the eviction papers, but then they changed their mind because they didn't want to go to court. They didn't want to take them to court after all. So the person is asking, is that legal?
Well, I think it sounds, so what I'm thinking of in my head as I try to answer that question is I'm thinking about the eviction process. Where are you in the eviction process?
Okay.
It sounds to me like maybe there was an eviction notice, maybe not, but it sounds to me like a court case didn't get started. So it sounds to me like you're either at a really early stage in the eviction process, or you're just not in it yet, right? Maybe it sounds like your landlord maybe is not going to evict.
Okay.
But then I also hear a question like, is it legal to say you're going to evict somebody and then not do it? Is that kind of, right? That's like a threat, right? To threaten eviction and not do it.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't see a way to hold your landlord responsible. And I understand that that's an awful situation to be in, right? The threat of eviction is really serious and can really damaging, I think. But as a litigator from a legal perspective, I don't see a way to punish or get back at your landlord for doing that. I think some possibilities are to contact your city council person. Another possibility is to talk to the press, right? Try to tell the press about this kind of landlord abuse.
Right.
And I'm seeing a chat. Yeah, and I think Ileana really helpfully points out, you can also call your local JP court just to double check and make sure that there's no eviction lawsuit pending against you, right? So,
Okay.
and I'm not sure if we have the ability to screen share here, but you can get on Google and figure out which JP court pertains to your address, like which district are you in? I always Google Bexar County, who represents me. That'll tell me what JP I'm in. And and when I say JP, I'm talking about Justice of the Peace Court. What Justice of the Peace Court do you want to call? And just double check, make sure there's no eviction action pending against you. There's no eviction lawsuit against you right now. Right.
Well, I have this other person that's also asking a question as well. When should it's going off the hook here. When should a tenant contact TRLA when they receive the notice to vacate, Or when they have the court date, they've been served by the constable. When is best to contact TRLA?
Yeah, I think earlier is better, right?
Okay.
The deadlines sometimes come real fast. So I think if you've got that eviction notice, give us a call. Let's get the application process started. And maybe what happens is we just provide you advice about your rights right now, and we tell you call us back if you get sued, right? Like maybe we don't accept your case at that time. But I think, I think information and legal advice is helpful at any stage of the process. So if you get an eviction notice, I encourage you to call TRLA, Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid.
Wow. Okay. And another individual is saying, after being late with rent just about 7 days, can a renter legally can the renter be legally locked out of the apartment for being late just 1 week, 7 days, or is there a certain number of days that the landlord has to wait before they lock them out?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a really important one. It's one that comes up often. So, can your landlord lock you out if you're late on rent? It's a weird answer. Like the answer is yes. And the only thing you have to do is call your landlord and say, I'm asking for a new key, please. And then your landlord is legally required to give you a new key.
Okay.
And if your landlord doesn't, you should call TRLA.
Okay.
Because there's a very quick legal process. It's called getting a writ of reentry. So you've got to run into court, file a writ of reentry. It's a quick proceeding, and you should get back in your home. I'm really glad that question was asked, because I think it's this really funny like little wrinkle in the law, right? We say over and over again, you can't be evicted without having a court case, right? You can't be evicted without notice, a lawsuit, a hearing, etc. But your landlord can change the locks. And the only thing you've got to do is ask for it. Ask for a new key. And if the landlord doesn't give it to you, call us or go to the Justice of the Peace Court and say you want to do a writ of reentry. You want to re-enter your home, reentry, a writ of
reentry. Okay. Let's see here.
I have another question. If we filled out a CDC declaration and we gave it to the landlord already, but I only owe 1 month, if I am all caught up by June 31st and we still have a year left on our contract, can we still get evicted if we are caught up on rent?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate answer, like technically by the letter of the law, yes, right? By being late, by being very late, probably you broke your lease. And probably if the landlord really wanted to, they could go through with the eviction process. I think I would want to look carefully. I think whoever asked that question should call us if your landlord does sue you for eviction, because there's a lot of different little wrinkles that might work in your favor. And I think the other thing I would say about that is there is a lot of uncertainty in the law right now. The CDC order is less than a year old, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen at the end of it. I think if you're caught up just sort of in a human way, probably your landlord is going to be willing to negotiate. Your landlord may be willing to negotiate with you, may be willing to, whatever, cut a deal, avoid the eviction. But I think, unfortunately, by the letter of the law, you violated your lease, and that means that the landlord could try to go through with the eviction.
Sorry, there's another individual that's asking, since the process of rental assistance, this individual was told is going to be 45 days to wait, would the would the tenant just wait to pay rent? Or, as we advise, please make an effort, but in some cases, the landlord won't take partial payment. So the person's trying to be compliant with the CDC, trying to give them $10, $20, $100. but the landlord won't take it. What does that person do?
Yeah, great question. You want to get ready to prove that you tried, right? So your landlord won't accept your payment. Okay, can you send a text message? Can you send an email saying, dear landlord, I just tried to give you $50 as a partial rent payment. You wouldn't accept it, period, right? Can you tape record yourself trying to make that partial payment? That's what we recommend. And the reason we recommend it is because of what I said earlier about this procedure where the landlord challenges the CDC declaration, where the landlord says, Judge, I don't think the tenant is telling the truth. And you want to be ready in that moment to say, no, no, no. Look at this text message. Look at this video that I took on my phone. I am trying to make partial payments. I am trying to pay whatever I can. So I think that answers the second part of the question, but I'm not sure, Molly, is there an earlier part about like while a rental assistance application is in process? Is there another part of the question?
Well, the other part was while the application was in process, do they just go ahead and wait for the rental assistance to pay or pay themselves?
Yeah, I think as a lawyer, the advice has got to be do your best to pay whatever rent you can, right? You signed a document saying you were going to do that. So the lawyer answer is do your best to pay whatever you can.
Right.
Also, we're humans that live in the real world, and you have to make decisions about your budget.
Right, right. Someone's also asking, is there a way? I don't know. This is a good question. I've always wanted to ask this myself. Is there a way to pause or stop the account with the apartment so that one won't evict him or her, and they can get caught up on the late rents? Like, can you pause the rents and then let them catch up, and then continue on? You know what I mean?
So it sounds to me like the question is, can you get your landlord to forgive a couple months of rent, right? Say like May, June, and July, you don't have to pay?
No, I think they're actually saying to pause it. Like, well, yeah, I guess they are saying that. They're like, because you know how you still have to owe rent. So you're trying to catch up to pay. Let's say you're 6 months behind. Yeah. And as every month comes, there's another month of rent that's due. And then they're trying to catch up. They're like 2 months caught up, but then another month is due. And then.
Yeah, I understand the question. I think, legally, no, I don't see a way to sort of force that down your landlord's throat. I think you could certainly ask. And if your landlord agrees, get it in writing and make sure you can prove that agreement happened. So you could ask your landlord. And the other thing is just the rental assistance programs that we asked for, that we talked about before. For instance, with Texas rent relief, if you can get 15 months of rental assistance, that's not pausing your rent, but that will put you in really a good position for a lot of folks.
Or getting signed a payment pledge form, right? Something like that will help, right?
Yeah.
Payment pledge form.
We got another question. If you were locked out from your apartment, can you enter the apartment to get your medications and clothing?
Yeah, it's a really subtle question. And I want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing in a recorded webinar, but.
Is it best for them to call in the morning?
Yeah, well, no, I think there is a general answer to that. If you're a tenant and you've been locked out illegally, and I want to be very clear that, like, when I say if you're a tenant, I mean you're not a trespasser. Nobody is acting like you don't have the right to be in the home, right? If you're a tenant and your landlord locks you out, you ask for a key, the landlord doesn't give it to you. You have the legal right to be in your home. Now, you don't have the legal right to damage your landlord's property, such as the new locks that they just installed, or the window screens, or whatever else you might need to damage in order to get inside. So I think the best advice for that person is, if you can wait until business hours, if your need for your medication can wait until business hours, go to the JP court, the Justice of the Peace Court that corresponds to your home, and you want to get that writ of reentry.
Maddie, I have another question. I'm sorry. There's a question here that says, if I didn't go to my court hearing, but I received a judgment in the mail, is it too late for me to file the CDC declaration?
Great question. Definitely not too late. I think if you got that kind of a judgment in the mail, you want to act very quickly. You're on a really tight clock.
Wow.
CDC declaration, when we talk about it, pauses eviction cases. It pauses them at any stage. So in your stage, or in this question asker's stage, you've already lost the eviction, but the writ of possession, that's that document that's taped to the door that says the constable is coming on this day at this time. The writ of possession either hasn't been taped on your door yet, or the constable hasn't escorted you out yet. You can use the CDC declaration to try to stop those things from happening. But I do want to repeat, it's very urgent. That happens fast. And I encourage you to call legal aid about it.
Yeah.
The other reason to call legal aid is because depending on the timeline, you might still be able to appeal, which is a way to have the chance to make your arguments to the judge and potentially get several more weeks, a couple months more time, depending on the circumstances. Did that answer the question, Ileana?
Yes, thank you.
I have another question. What happens if your lease has ended, but you're still in the process of getting assistance, but your landlord will not provide you with a new lease? What rights does a tenant have?
Great question. The first piece of an answer that I want to give is, for that person, Texas rent relief is probably the best rental assistance, because Texas rent relief, your landlord doesn't need to agree with your application or support your application or anything like that. So the first idea for that person is Texas rent relief, definitely. The next thing to say is, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so if your lease is over, most of the time we can't force landlords to renew leases. There's special exceptions, but generally we can't force them to renew leases. However, if your landlord is going to try to force you out, they've still got to walk through all of the steps of the eviction process that we talked about, and you still have a chance to stand up for yourself at every step of the way.
Yeah.
So to that, I think the answer to that question is, you have the right to be there until your landlord goes all the way through with all of the eviction, with all of the steps of the eviction process. But you don't have the right to re-up your lease unless your landlord agrees. And actually, I need to qualify all of that and say you've got to read your lease, because some leases have different renewal provisions, automatic renewal or something like this. And to that question asker, I would encourage you to call legal aid, because we'd love to look at your lease with you and sort of think in a more careful way about what your rights and responsibilities are in this moment.
We have time for one more question, and then we need to wrap it up.
So the follow-up to that question was, can the landlord do a cutoff of your utilities when that happens, that situation? So wouldn't that be the same thing as a lockout? They can do a quick legal proceeding or something like that with the utilities when they do that?
Yeah, so if you're in the home, if you or your stuff is in the home and the landlord cuts off your utilities, Molly, you're exactly right. There's a quick legal process. It's called a writ of restoration, restoring your utilities, writ of restoration. And we, call us. We'd love to talk to you about that process. And what we'll tell you to do, or what will help you do, is go to the JP court and file for a writ of restoration, trying to get your landlord to turn the utilities back on. And I guess I should just, to be totally fair and clear, there are some circumstances where the landlord is allowed to cut off your utilities. If they've given you certain notices or, this and that. For the most part, you can get them turned on, you can get them turned back on. And I encourage that person to call us so we can talk about it in more detail.
Oh, good. Okay, well, before closing with the lovely Lou, we wanted to take an opportunity to share what resources are available in the community. Remember, you can always visit us at our website to get legal resources, sample forms, and instructions on the eviction process, just like repeated throughout at our website, trla.org. For renters' rights. And then also no registration required. You can go onto a website called sacred.org, SACRD. That's a website where you can find out what housing, food, or any other need or assistance that you might have, anything under the sky. It's available within your reach. All you have to do is put in a 5-digit zip code wherever you're at, and it's SACRD.org. Also, you can contact your local utility service provider to see if you can get on a type of deferred payment plan for needed utility assistance. SAWS has a donation repair fund called Community Pipe Repair Program, otherwise known as CPR. And that will help qualified homeowners and renters repair freeze-damaged pipes and restore safe water services. So it's called CPR with SAWS. And all you have to do is go on to the saws.org/CPR. Also, just like Maddie explained earlier, if you live within the City of San Antonio limits, then you can contact the City of San Antonio Neighborhood and Housing Services Department at the www.sanantonio.gov/NHSD. Or you can call 210-207-5910. But if you can't get through, just go ahead and go on the website. Also, there are two more things I want to say. The state of Texas that Matt is explaining is the Texas Rent Relief Program. That provides rental relief assistance. For more information, you can visit them at texasrentrelief.com. And it's all one word, texasrentrelief.com. Or you can call them at the toll-free number, which is 833-989-7368. And then lastly, the City of San Antonio Emergency Resource. It's a call center called ERC. They provide assistance to residents affected by the 2021 Texas severe winter storms. Residents can actually call 311 Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, and then press option number 5. And it's 210-207-6000 to connect with the call taker. And then, or you can go to the website, and it's called strongertogether.sanantonio.gov. And that's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So Lou, go ahead and take us on home.
Wow, ladies, thank you so much for sharing these resources and information to members of our community. For all you participants, we hope that the information on the Tenant Power Hour was useful and encourage you to share with others. If you have any pending questions on topics that were addressed today, please give us a call at 210-212-3703. If we do not answer, leave us a message and give us, a couple of hours to get back to you. We are extremely busy, but we really want to help you and assist you and make sure to try to keep you housed. You guys have a good one and you have a good evening, and thank you again.